Prologue. The Last Days of Talth. You sent riders to Morlak and Talth, did you not? Have they returned? They have not, and they will not. I am in contact with my brothers and sisters. Morlak is already under our control, and Talth? The Baron of Talth was stubborn and refused to comply. The greylings have taken the capital and burned their fields and villages. There is nothing left of Talth. Mina, last of the 12, 426 AT. Baron Derello del Talth watched his city die. Flickering incandescent fires spread as far as the distant horizon, their golden glow lighting up the night sky. Below him, hundreds of timber houses fueled a colossal wall of flame half a mile wide, the uncaring wind pushing it inexorably towards the last remnants of the town guard lining the stone wall of the inner courtyard. Noxious plumes of dirty grey smoke spiraled skywards, carrying the stench of burnt flesh up to the roof of the keep where he stood, his bony, blue-veined hands gripping the ancient parapet. And before the wall of flame came the greylings. They were far too many to count. A boiling mass of grey-skinned bodies scampering forwards on all fours, chittering and shrieking like bickering children. Threshers towered over their lesser brethren, some wearing rusty breastplates or crude iron helmets, others holding barbed whips that snapped and cracked as they urged the smaller creatures onwards. Derello shook his head sadly. The heat from the distant blaze was not enough to warm his old, tired bones. 30 years ago, he would have stood proudly on the walls with his men, but his fighting days were long gone. His coat of chainmail hung heavy on his skeletal frame. These days he could barely even hold a sword. He looked down at his swollen, arthritic knuckles in disgust. Old age had crept up on him, slowly leeching away his strength and resilience. He had lost his friends through disease or senility. His wife had died peacefully in her sleep, yet he endured, battling the merciless currents of time alone as they deepened the wrinkles in his face and fused the joints in his arms and legs. And now this final torture, the complete and utter destruction of his lands. It had only taken 2 weeks for the greylings to lay waste to Talth. The pit was first to fall. The small contingent of old guard massacred within hours. The survivors had fled south to the Temple of Guana, second of the 12, an ancient walled fortress high up in the northern hills. The Knights of Guana had quickly assessed the situation and split into 2 groups, half riding south to the capital, the other half marching north to slow the greyling advance. 100 men against thousands. A brave and selfless sacrifice. Derello had not wasted this final gift, using the time bought in blood to organize the evacuation of Talth and the strengthening of the ancient stone walls. Days later, scouts posted along the northern outskirts had sighted the greyling horde. The enemy was advancing slowly, slaughtering sheep and cattle left unattended by their owners, burning the last of the crops and polluting the wells and waterways with animal carcasses and feces. Great swaths of woodland were put to the torch, leaving behind a monochrome wasteland. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason to such wanton destruction, only the pure, unadulterated hatred for all things made by man. The walls of Talth had not stopped them, despite the valiant efforts of the Knights of Guana. For a night and a day they had held, the massive armoured walls accounting for hundreds of greyling deaths. But it had not been enough. For every greyling killed, 2 more had appeared to take its place. A crude battering ram made from a fallen tree trunk had shattered the main gate, allowing threshers to enter the city and assault the ramparts from the rear. Surrounded and exhausted, the guardsmen would have been annihilated had it not been for Derello's son and heir. The courageous nobleman had gathered the tattered remains of the heavy cavalry and led a desperate countercharge down the main street, clearing an avenue of retreat for the beleaguered defenders. A brief respite. For now, the last few survivors manned the inner wall surrounding the keep itself, the last line of defense with no means of escape, and his son had not returned. An inhuman screech, strident and piercing, came from somewhere down below. An enormous wooden litter came into view, supported by 8 sweating threshers. On it sat a hideous, malformed creature, over 20 feet long, dark grey and slug-like. It had no legs, only a long, slimy tail spattered with a dark red substance that could only be human blood. Small stick-like arms gestured wildly towards the wall. Its porcine nose sniffed the air, searching for something. Derello could see that the thing was blind, 2 ragged circles of white scarred tissue covering empty eye sockets. The creature opened its distended mouth and screeched again, loud enough to make Derello's ears ring. The cry was answered by a cacophony of discordant sound, and the greyling horde surged forwards. A deadly rain of steel-tipped arrows pattered down amongst them, killing dozens, their bodies trampled into the dirt. The first of the greylings reached the base of the wall and began to climb. Sharp claws punched easily into crumbling mortar. "I must go down to meet them," muttered Derello to himself, one wasted hand straying to the pommel of his gilded longsword. He would not die up here all alone. "My lord," came a voice from behind him, and he turned to see one of the Knights of Guana had joined him on the roof, a tall, muscular, pale-faced man with short, spiky black hair and indigo eyes. The knight was wearing a suit of heavy plate armor, complete with a steel gorget that covered his neck and lower jaw. A metal buckler was strapped tightly to his left forearm, leaving both hands free to wield the well-worn longsword sheathed at his side. Derello tried to recall the man's name and failed miserably. What is it, Sir?" "Galen, my lord." "Of course. My apologies. My mind is not what it once was, Sir Knight." "No need to apologize, my lord. I came to discuss what should be done about your heir. I fear the walls will not resist the greylings for long." "My heir? My son has been found?" Derello felt his heart beating loudly in his chest. "Maybe there is still reason to hope." Galen gave an embarrassed cough. "No, my lord. I fear your son did not survive the fight. Although his valiant efforts saved the lives of many. I was talking about your grandson, Cale." At the sound of his name, a young sandy-haired boy no more than 9 peered cautiously out from behind the big knight's legs where he had been hiding, lost in the shadows. "Grandfather?" he said in a squeaky voice, barely audible above the sounds of battle echoing up from below. Derello stared at the child's tear-streaked face as conflicting emotions flooded his mind. The boy looked so much like his father. Same light-colored hair, same sky-blue eyes, love and grief intertwined. For a moment they threatened to overwhelm him, but he resisted, drawing on the last of his fading strength. "Cale, of course." Here was something worth fighting for. He felt like a veil had been lifted from his eyes. Derello stood straighter. "Approach, boy. Down on one knee. Sir Galen, if you would bear witness." The knight nodded. Baron Del Talth drew his ornate sword, ignoring the pain that burned through his hand as his fingers wrapped around the grip. Cale was kneeling before him, trembling with fear. The old man touched the tip of his blade lightly to the boy's shoulders. "Cale, as my right as Lord of Talth, and as witnessed by this Knight of Guana, I hereby declare you heir to the Barony of Talth, with all the titles and honors that such a rank entails. May the 12 guide you, Lord Cale." The boy rose on shaking legs. "I thank you, grandfather," he said formally, bowing at the waist. "Excellent," Derello replied, sheathing his weapon. "Sir Galen, how long do we have?" The knight surveyed the carnage below. "A few minutes, my lord, at most." The greylings had gained a foothold on the ramparts despite the valiant efforts of the defenders. Several of their numbers were tying coarse ropes around the crenels, ropes strong enough to support the weight of a thresher. A large clawed hand appeared, then another. With a snarl, an 8-foot-tall hulking beast pulled itself over the battlements and landed heavily among the defenders. A reverse swipe of its cudgel brained one of the guards and sent another reeling back into his fellows.
"Very well,"
said Derello, nodding curtly.
"Then there is no time to waste. Follow me."
They left the roof and descended the twisting stairs down to the great hall, where 2 more armored knights awaited them. The green banner of Talth hung proudly on the wall at the far end over an elevated dais. Derello took a moment to gaze upon his coat of arms. A prancing stag, its antlers raised defiantly.
"Follow me, below the dais,"
he said, breathing heavily. He forced his aching body forwards and pointed to one of the large slabs that paved the floor of the hall. "My lord?" asked Gayling.
"It's hollow, Sir Knight."
The Knight of Guana nodded and drew his longsword, cutting through the joints surrounding the slab with a couple of precise strikes. With a grunt of effort, he pulled on the stone square, lifting it from its bedding and revealing a locked wooden trap-door beneath. Derello reached under his chainmail and produced a rusty iron key.
"This should still fit. It works both ways, so lock the door behind you once you are through. The passageway leads to a cellar below one of the farmhouses on the southern road. We will just have to hope the exit has not been blocked. Half of those timber structures have already been burnt to the ground."
A scratching sound came from the far side of the hall beyond the barred double doors, claws on wood. The 2 knights of Guana silently unsheathed their swords.
"Once you are out of the tunnel, I suggest you aim for the coastal village of Hayden. They have ships leaving for Kessrin almost every day. Find the Baron Derello. Tell him what has happened here."
"My lord, would it not be better for you to accompany us? I fear reaching the Baron may be difficult without your support." The Baron gave a tired laugh.
"I barely made it down 5 flights of stairs, Sir Knight. I would only slow you down. If the Baron refuses to see you, remind him of the time I saved his father from drowning in the River Trent. It was a closely guarded secret that the previous Baron, the so-called Lord of the Western Coasts, could not swim."
The scratching became more insistent. Derello sighed and once more tugged his own sword laboriously from its sheath.
"I thank you for all your order has done for us, Sir Galen," he said. "It is a debt I fear I will not live to repay, but my heir will do his best. Won't you, Gale?"
The young boy nodded, eyeing the wooden trap-door warily. Galen unlocked it and threw the door open. The first few rungs of a metal ladder disappeared into the darkness. "Time for us to leave, young lord," he said, beckoning with one gauntleted hand. Derello looked on fondly as his grandson lowered himself carefully onto the ladder and descended into the tunnel. Galen followed closely behind, his massive frame barely squeezing through the hole. He nodded one final time to the Baron before closing the door with a loud thud. Derello heard the click of a key turning in the lock. With a satisfied smile, he turned his attention back to the doors at the end of the great hall. The 2 knights of Guana were standing a few feet from the entrance, helms on and bucklers raised. Cracks began to appear along the wooden plank barring the doors as it buckled under the pressure. It would not be long now. Derello felt adrenaline course through his body, numbing his fear and filling him with vigor. He strode down the length of the hall and positioned himself between the 2 knights.
"Gentlemen, it is an honor to stand beside you," he said, watching the cracks spread across the surface. Suddenly, without warning, the scratching ceased. An uneasy silence filled the hall. Derello frowned and glanced at his stoic companions, their faces hidden behind their helms. "Maybe they've decided to give up," he said, tentatively. Then the doors exploded in a shower of rivets and splintered wood. The largest thresher Derello had ever seen emerged from the wreckage, its bare muscular torso a mass of sores and badly healed scars. A crude necklace of what appeared to be severed human hands hung around the thing's neck, and it carried an enormous sword-toothed blade of corroded metal spattered with blood. It fixed Derello with two dirty yellow eyes tinged with malice. "Oh, man," the creature grunted, the word barely intelligible as it twisted its jaw in an effort to mimic human speech. From somewhere behind it came the cackling of greylings. "You do not belong here," Derello replied, fighting to keep the tremor from his voice. The thresher bared its teeth. "Our land. Our time." The Knights of Goanna attacked, charging forwards far faster than Derello had thought possible for two men in heavy plate. The thresher blocked one swing with his blade and took the second on its left shoulder. The sword drew blood, but the wound did not seem deep enough to bother it. It retaliated. A savage kick to the chest sent one knight reeling backwards, his breastplate cracked and dented. A quick forward jab knocked the weapon from the other knight's hand. The sword-toothed blade came down again. The knight raised his buckler to parry the blow, only for the rusty sword to cleave straight through the upraised arm and cut deep into the man's neck. The thresher ripped his blade free in a shower of crimson and bellowed a series of animalistic snarls. Greylings scampered out of the shadows behind it and set upon the fallen knights with tooth and claw. One of the men managed a hoarse cry before his throat was torn out. Derello tried to move, but found himself rooted to the spot, his body refusing to respond. His sword fell from arthritic fingers. The colossal thresher loomed over him, his eyes burning with a cold hatred. The Baron felt a powerful hand clamp down on his skull. "Our time," the thing repeated, and squeezed.